We always said that we would ease restrictions, carefully ease the rules. Where we can, we would. And Victorians have done an amazing job following through the rules and getting tested.
Tonight, breaking news, thousands of Melburnians return to in-person work and school after the state government announced several eased restrictions. However, many remain as the opposition is accused of spreading conspiracy theories about Dan Andrews' injury. We'll be speaking live to the member for Sandringham, Brad Rosewell, in just a few minutes. It's Sunday the 13th of June. You're watching 6 News also tonight.
First day in the stand today, are you still feeling confident about this?
Very much looking forward to telling my side of the story, mate. I think it's time to set the record straight.
Ben Roberts-Smith continues his case against 3 Nine newspapers, claiming that his Victoria Cross put a target on his back while breaking down in court in what's been dubbed the defamation trial of the century. And as the death toll from Victoria's wild weather rises, the cleanup is set to continue in both metro and regional areas. Even so, it's believed that the rain will continue next week right across the state. Good evening, thanks for joining us this Sunday evening. We are back in our Melbourne headquarters thanks to the easing of restrictions here in Melbourne, and we have a lot to report on this. Breaking news with COVID cases, plus not one but 2 live interviews tonight with MP Brad Rosewell and Alex Rivchin from the Executive Council of Australian Jewellery. But first tonight, thousands of Melburnians have begun to return to in-person work and school after the state government announced several eased restrictions. However, many remain, including no visitors allowed in homes, masks still mandatory both indoors and outdoors, and a 25-kilometre radius across metro areas. Opposition leader Michael O'Brien has called the government cruel for apparently not supporting thousands of small businesses, which we will be getting to with Brad Rosewell in around 2 minutes. First though, let's go to Melbourne where senior reporter Darby Travers has the latest developments.
Victoria has recorded just 1 new locally acquired COVID-19 case overnight, a primary close contact of a previous case, who the Department of Health says has been quarantining throughout their infectious period. This means there are now 68 total active cases in the state, which includes people in quarantine and follows over 17,000 test results being processed yesterday, but authorities have expressed over that number as it is under the 25,000 plus Chief Health Officer Brett Sutton was calling for. We also got a major development last night with Daniel Andrews finally confirming when he'd be back at work, that being June 28 after he fell on wet stairs in March of this year. The Victorian Premier last night released a video onto social media wearing his now famous North Face jacket, that is, here's some of what he had to say.
The vertebrae in my back's almost fully healed. The brace has come off. That's the brace I've worn for 18 hours a day for the last 3 months. But the ribs are not fully healed. They'll take a while, and the doctors tell me these next few weeks will be quite a painful adjustment to getting used to not having that brace on. Those strangers, tens of thousands of them who've sent me cards and notes and letters, your kindness and your concern is in some ways the best medicine, and I can't thank you enough.
And as expected, Dan Andrews' upcoming return has dominated the front pages here in Melbourne, with the Sunday Age reporting on a secret bid to extend special powers used throughout the pandemic and adding the Premier is back on deck, while the Herald Sun has simply said, "I am back," with it now being 3 months since Andrews' horror fall.
Now, as mentioned just before, Victorian opposition leader Michael O'Brien has called the state government cruel for, quote-unquote, not supporting thousands of small businesses and has slammed the lockdown as appalling. But his party has also been accused of appalling behaviour after Liberal MP Louise Staley released a list of questions she wants answered about Premier Dan Andrews' injury in March of this year. Now, we publicly reached out to a number of people from the Victorian Liberal Party, including the opposition leader, and also contacted an MP directly. Only one of them has responded, and that was the member for Sandringham, Brad Rosewell. He joins me now live. Good to talk with you this evening. Should these restrictions have been lifted a week ago as initially planned?
Yeah, thanks very much, Leonardo. Lovely to meet you, mate. And, I've been a distant admirer of your work for some time, but appreciate the opportunity to join you. Look, mate, I really think that it's difficult for an opposition to make a call on exactly when restrictions should ease, because unlike members of the government, we don't actually have access to the advice on which the government bases its decisions. Now, it says that it bases its decisions upon health advice, and for some time now we've been asking for that. We've been asking to see those details so that we can, propose, perhaps even an alternative to what the government is executing. The truth is of these lockdowns, though, the impact has been significant. And not just on businesses, but on entire communities, and especially young people. I don't know if you caught, but earlier this week I saw a bunch of really scary statistics come out in relation to especially young persons' mental health. In relation to increased numbers of attempted suicide and other things, and this is really a result because the figures that I saw were being compared year on year or since December last year, and these are as a result, sadly, of the circumstance we're in. And lockdowns haven't helped. So look, there's a whole bunch of things we think the government should be doing differently, should be doing better. But the crux of a detailed and comprehensive answer to that question, in my view, really relies upon the government being transparent, the government being open, the government being less secretive than it has been, and making that public advice on which they're basing their decisions public.
Now, you mentioned mental health there. Your colleague, Liberal MP James Newbury, faced a fair bit of backlash after posting a now deleted explicit image of self-harm injuries, which a lot of people say goes against all suicide prevention guidelines. Do you support what he did?
James has since deleted that post, and that was the right thing to do based on the advice that was provided. Mate, I'm very happy for you to ask him those questions directly. What I do support is the intent behind the post. James is a good person. He's a good member for Brighton. He's a good colleague. And I know that his heart is in absolutely the right place. He wants to draw attention to the fact that young people are being failed. Young people are being failed in this state at the moment, to the point where we're seeing these alarming statistics relating to self-harm, suicide, and family violence increase in levels that are just frankly unacceptable. That at its heart is what James wanted to highlight, and that's something that I've also done in the Parliament and on social media this week.
Yeah, well, I should point out we did reach out to James Newbury a number of times over the past week and have so far not gotten a response. He is welcome to reach out to us if needed. Just changing pace now, and I'll get back to the pandemic shortly. Something you and many others commented on, journalist Mike Carlton being labelled sexist and misogynistic after a comment about Louise Staley's outfit. There it is on screen now. Now, that's just one of many controversial comments he's made on Twitter. He also got a lot of backlash for previous comments about Jewish people. Should he lose his Order of Australia honours because of this?
Well, I think he should. He doesn't reflect the best of Australia, and people who are awarded those high awards should be reflecting the very best of Australia. And it's clear that his conduct, last year and again this year, is tasteless, it's grubby, it's misogynistic, it's sexist, and I called him out on it, and he blocked me. And, no loss to me, but the point still remains. People, Australians, who receive those very worthy honours must be the very best of us. And Mike Carlton, in my view, is not.
Just going back to what we reported on earlier with that list of questions for Premier Dan Andrews about his injury, Is your party amplifying conspiracy theories?
Well, the Shadow Treasurer asked a series of questions. 5 of those have been responded to, as I understand it, by Ambulance Victoria, and there are 7 outstanding.
Okay, but again, are you actually aware of the exact theories going around? The media release didn't mention them specifically, but they range from possible to quite outlandish, even some defamatory ones. Do you know what they are?
Yeah, look, I want to extend my very best wishes to the Premier of Victoria as he recovers from obviously a significant health circumstance, and wish him a speedy recovery. I think in politics, sometimes the politics needs to be taken out of politics. Sometimes we easily forget that we all share a common humanity. So I want to acknowledge that up front. Look, I'm not one who's into conspiracy theories, Leonardo, but the questions that have been put by the Shadow Treasurer are in fact that. They're questions. Clearly the government thinks that they have some credibility because Ambulance Victoria has responded to some of them. As I say, 5 of the 7. You would have to have been living under a rock not to have heard any number of rumours flying around. Perhaps the Shadow Treasurer's questions are an opportunity for the government, perhaps even the Premier, to clear the air, get on with it and get over it in advance of his return.
Just finally, we often talk about the so-called pandemic elections, incumbent governments all winning their respective elections since COVID came to Australia. Does your party actually have a decent chance of winning the next state election?
Absolutely we do, because the alternative is 4 more years of Labor, 4 more years of uncertainty, 4 more years of increased taxes, which flow on to some of our most vulnerable people in our state. With time, there's opportunity, Leonardo, in politics, and there are some 17, 18 odd months between now and the next state election. During the course of that time, the Liberals will continue to present credible alternatives to the Victorian people. Of course, we have an obligation not to be necessarily government cheerleaders, but to be a genuine but responsible opposition, and to critique and perhaps even criticise the governments where we think when we think they are doing wrong by our state and by the people of our state. That is our obligation. That is our responsibility. We have an obligation to do that. But we also have an obligation to propose what a credible alternative is. We've started doing that already. We've started releasing policy. We're not waiting until the death knock before the November 2022 election to do that. We've already released a very bold plan to stop sending household waste to landfill by 2035, and instead redirecting it to an energy from waste facility, which will add power to our grid and deal with our rubbish problems. We've already announced policies, more than 70 of them, in our Back to Work and Back in Business plan. We take the job of responsibility of opposition seriously. I think we've demonstrated that, and we'll continue to do so between now and November next year.
Right, we'll leave it there. Brad Rosewell, the member for Sandringham, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, mate.
All right, 2 other news tonight. Individuals have been held in several cities for the Biloela family who have been in an immigration detention centre for 3 years. The youngest of the family, Tharnika, turned 4 yesterday in a Perth hospital, being treated for sepsis as a result of untreated pneumonia. And now Home Affairs Minister Karen Andrews has dismissed reports that they could be resettled in New Zealand or the US rather than their home in central Queensland. Reporter Holly Shields has the latest on the family's fight to stay here in Australia.
The Australian government is facing increased pressure, both internal and external, to bring the Biloela family back from Christmas Island. The Tamil asylum seekers have been in immigration detention for over 3 years and have recently been evacuated to a Perth hospital earlier this week, with the younger of their daughters being treated for sepsis related to pneumonia. Overwhelming support has come from 2 coalition MPs, as well as a host of Australian celebrities singing in a video for the young girl's birthday. On top of that, over 500,000 have signed a petition calling for the federal government to allow their families return home to Biloela, their previous residence. The government MP Ken O'Dowd spoke to the Brisbane Times, saying it's no good for the family, it's no good for the Australian taxpayer, it's no good for anyone, and it's got to be resolved. Although various cabinet ministers have cautioned that leniency of the country's immigration policy could lead to a ripple effect of illegal immigration and people smuggling, both of which in itself put many lives at risk. The courts have found that the Biloela family are not entitled to refugee status and could be facing a return to Sri Lanka. Despite this, calls for asylum on compassionate grounds continue, and across the board is a message of hope for the young girl's recovery.
The ABC have hit back at The Australian, accusing them of undermining journalism after the paper published an editorial about Louise Milligan, a reporter for Four Corners, and Sally Neighbour, the show's executive producer. The headline was, quote, "Greatest enemy of truth is those who conspire to lie," but the national broadcaster has now responded, saying in a statement that the editorial made serious and unfounded allegations about Milligan and Neighbour, adding, quote, "To see The Australian use its editorial space in such a way undermines the traditions of journalism." The MEAA also chimed in, saying it was both disgraceful and destructive, but Sally Neighbour says she will not be pursuing any legal action. Well, take Australia's most decorated soldier, the nation's largest media company, allegations of war crimes, and you get a high-stakes and unusual legal battle dubbed the defamation trial of the century. There were tears from hardened SAS soldier Ben Roberts-Smith as he gave evidence during the trial's first week. It could go up for 10, with the Channel 7 executive continuing his fight against 3 Nine newspapers. Chief reporter Connor R4K breaks down what's happened so far.
The stakes are high. Millions of dollars in legal fees, reputations, the truth. Ben Roberts-Smith, 42, a Victoria Cross recipient and the victim, he says, of malicious journalists and jealous fellow soldiers who wanted to cut down the tall poppy. Late last week, he gave evidence at Sydney's federal court in a historic defamation trial that could run for up to 10 weeks. It centres around the work of 3 journalists and articles published in 2018 in The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald and the Canberra Times. They allege he bullied SAS troops, executed 2 teenage Afghans, and kicked an unarmed shepherd off a cliff before ordering he be executed. Ben Roberts-Smith continued to deny the allegations. 9 newspapers will call 21 witnesses from the SAS to testify. A look back through the archives shows just what a difference a decade makes. This was 9 years ago.
Such a man is to be honoured and never denigrated. I therefore ask that the network and both journalists involved apologise to this great Australian and his family for comments that demean a man who has spent his life serving our nation.
Who are you talking about?
We're talking about Ben Roberts-Smith.
So you're accusing him of engagement in war crimes?
I am.
Another important milestone for Roberts-Smith last week too, 11 years since the Battle of Tazak, which won him the Victoria Cross. A prestigious award that he says put a target on his back, saying under cross-examination, as soon as you become a tall poppy, that gives people a chance to belittle you and to use that award against you out of pure spite. But it was while describing the moment he killed a 15-year-old insurgent in Tazak that Ben Roberts-Smith swiveled on his chair, turned his back to the court, and started to break down. Now put that in the context of one of Channel 9's allegations that say Roberts-Smith told another soldier that shooting an adolescent Afghan in the head was the most beautiful thing he'd seen. He says he feels like he's in a bloody nightmare, and when I met Roberts-Smith a few months ago, that sentiment was written on his face.
The death toll from Victoria's wild weather has risen, with a woman's body found in a vehicle southwest of Melbourne. Police say she went missing from the town of Simpson on Wednesday, and the death is not being treated as suspicious. But even as the clean-up continues, it's believed that while slightly less intense, the rain will continue right across the state. Reporter Lincoln Holmes has the latest on the ground from Geelong.
The rain may have eased across Victoria, but the cleanup is set to continue for weeks. Almost 300 residents in Traralgon have been able to return to their homes, with the evacuation order lifting yesterday. But they've been urged to check for any flood damage and have electrical and gas equipment professionally tested, while also monitoring the situation using the Vic Emergency app. Emergency services have had more than 8,000 weather-related calls since the storm hit earlier this week, leaving more than 58,000 homes and businesses without power. Flood warnings remain in place for almost half a dozen rivers across the entire state, and some rural communities have been left completely isolated as fallen trees continue to block roads. There are also fears that the storm may have impacted the state's COVID-19 vaccination rollout, with Channel 9 reporting that up to 2,000 doses may have been lost due to power cuts. Interstate Sydney has officially recorded its coldest day in 37 years, with a maximum of just 10 degrees. Other parts of New South Wales were blanketed in half a metre of snow, with drivers warned to cancel their long weekend travel plans due to the difficult conditions on the roads, as the cleanup continues right across Victoria. Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
And we'll be getting to the full national forecast for tomorrow a little later in the bulletin. Meanwhile, brace yourselves, because researchers say they found a new batch of coronaviruses in bats that includes one that may be the second closest genetically to COVID-19. 9 News reports that most of the samples came from species of horseshoe bats, with 3 of them also close to SARS genetically. Of course, we know that the World Health Organization says that the source of coronavirus is probably a bat, despite the new investigations into whether it came from a Wuhan lab. Our report on that is on our YouTube channel now. And speaking of China, while Scott Morrison attends the G7 summit in the UK as an observer, tensions back home with Beijing are still at an all-time high. The PM has called for a World Trade Organization reform as the government continues their case against China over tariffs on our barley, one of many things affected by the disputes, which also includes beef, wine and universities, saying there is a lot at stake for Australia, our region and the world. Political reporter Christian Penny has the details.
The war of words appears to continue between Australia and China, with Scott Morrison's approach being described as combative.
Before leaving for Singapore and the G7 in Britain, Scott Morrison spoke in Perth, where he laid out the key issues he's set to raise with the world's largest economic players.
Rapid military modernisation, tension over territorial claims, heightened economic coercion, undermining of international law, including the law of the sea, through to enhanced disinformation, foreign interference, cyber threats, enabled by new and emerging technologies. There's a lot to talk about in Cornwall.
Trade tensions with China have continued to exist on eggshells for over a year, beginning after the Prime Minister called for an investigation into the origins of coronavirus, with a focus on China being the source. The government also introduced foreign interference legislation, which led to the tearing up of the Belt and Road deal in Victoria.
But it is about prioritising Australia's national interests and ensuring that there's consistency across our foreign relations. I want to be very clear that it's not aimed at any one country.
Security in the region continues to be a rising fear, with both the Australian and Japanese governments agreeing to tighten their security as China continues its assertive presence in contested areas of the Asia-Pacific region. Chinese warships regularly violate Japanese waters, threatening fishermen and claiming undersea resources in the area. The meeting said to have reaffirmed the importance of keeping peace and stability in the region. On his way to the G7 in Singapore, the country has urged the Morrison government to engage with China, saying,
"You don't have to become like them, neither can you hope to make them become like you."
China has denounced recent naval drills in the South China Sea between Australia and the US Navy's 7th Fleet. China's foreign ministry has said the two countries should do things that are conducive to regional peace and stability instead of flexing their muscles. Australia recently joined the US in expressing concern over China's growing presence in the South China Sea. Scott Morrison's message appears to be clear though, sending strong messages at home and around the world.
We are living in a time of great uncertainty, not seen, I believe, since the 1930s outside of wartime.
Christian Penny, 6 News.
It's been revealed that anti-Semitic incidents more than doubled in May compared to last year, according to new data from the Anti-Defamation League. It follows a rise in tensions over the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that saw hundreds, most of them Palestinians, killed over the space of just 11 days before a ceasefire was agreed to on May 20. Joining me now live to discuss this is Alex Rivchin from the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. He's also an author. Alex, good to speak with you. What's behind the rise in anti-Semitic attacks and where around the world are they mainly happening?
Well, the rise that we've seen over the last couple of weeks, I think it's directly linked to the conflict that we saw between Israel and Hamas, but more so the way it was reported in the media, the way that social media kind of took off and misreported and misrepresented a lot of what was happening there. And invariably, when you've got the world's only Jewish state depicted on social media by prominent organizations, by celebrities online, as being evil, as deliberately trying to kill children, as bloodthirsty, as greedy, inevitably this is going to spill over into violence against Jews around the world. And that's exactly what's happened here. So we saw, for example, there was a pro-Palestinian rally in London, and after which convoys of cars drove into the Jewish neighborhood of Golders Green and from loudspeakers shouted, "We're going to rape your daughters." You know, we saw awful scenes in places like New York and Los Angeles. We saw violent attacks on Jews in the streets, and they're continuing all the time. So anti-Semitism, unfortunately, is a kind of permanent condition in our societies, but it tends to flare up at different points in time. And right now, it's directly linked to the way that people have been speaking in very extreme and inflammatory terms about Israel and Hamas.
You kind of touched on it there, but I do have to ask, do you consider anti-Zionism to be the same as anti-Semitism?
Well, if we understand Zionism correctly as the basic support for the right of the Jewish people to have a homeland, then anti-Zionism, the opposition to that, clearly reveals some hostility towards the Jewish people, because the Jewish connection to that land is 4,000 years old. It's a deep core part of our identities as a people. And denying our right to a homeland there really ends up being a malicious attack on the rights of the Jewish people. So, to be honest, Leo, I don't accept that anti-Zionism is separate from anti-Semitism, and that people can be anti-Zionist but very supportive or pro the Jewish people. It just doesn't work out that way.
So would that make Jews who are pro-Palestine anti-Semitic?
Well, you're talking about a very small number of people, really. It's a sliver of the Jewish world. So overwhelmingly, Jewish people, whether they be left-wing or right-wing, religious or secular, around the world are supportive of the right of the Jewish people to a homeland in their ancestral land. So they are Zionists. And within that spectrum, you've got a lot of debate about different aspects of government policy. Should they conduct their wars with Hamas in this way or that way? Should they do this or that? That's perfectly natural. But overwhelmingly, the Jewish world is Zionist and supportive of the state of Israel. Now, where you will find opposition to Zionism within the Jewish world are a few tiny sects of ultra-Orthodox Jews who basically believe that only the Messiah can proclaim a Jewish state. And you've also got some radical left-wingers who are part of that kind of school of thought that views Israel as being colonialist and imperialist and believe all that nonsense. But you're talking about numerically a very small number of people. Overwhelmingly, the Jewish world is pretty united on this question.
Okay, now given the majority of casualties in this conflict, both long-term and recently, are Palestinians, most of them civilians, do you consider what's going on to really be a fair fight?
Well, it's not a football game, Leo, where we want to see two even sides having a good contest and a good goal. You've got one side, which is a democratic state that has existed lawfully for 73 years. And on the other side, you've got a terrorist organization that exists for the sole reason of destroying that state and all of the Jewish people within it. So it is true that Israel has a stronger military capacity than the Palestinians, than Hamas. But thank God for that. Could you imagine what Hamas would do if it had the same sort of weaponry as Israel does? And we hear a lot about how Israel has this enormous military power and that it indiscriminately attacks the Palestinians. Something doesn't add up, because if they were so powerful and had capacity to really wage a vicious war on the Palestinians, as some people allege, the casualties would be much higher. The death toll in this conflict, every civilian death is a tragedy, but the death toll in this conflict, particularly the civilian death toll, is a fraction of that in other conflicts around the world. And that's because Israel conducts itself in a way that is moral, that seeks to limit civilian casualties and protect its own civilians, of course. Whereas Hamas, their sole aim, as I said, is to destroy human life. They fire 4,000 rockets aimed deliberately at civilian targets to kill as many people as possible. So just merely looking at who has lost more civilians doesn't tell the full story here.
You're certainly a strong supporter of Israel, both on social media and even as I'm talking to you now. Why do you defend a country that has been accused of war crimes by some people and even described as apartheid by the same people who ended the South African apartheid?
That's not quite accurate, Leo. So people do throw around those sorts of slurs about apartheid, about ethnic cleansing, genocide. Israel's accused of harvesting the organs of Palestinians. It's accused of anything anyone can put into their minds in order to smear and slur the people of Israel. Back in the 70s, the enemies of Israel realized that militarily they could not topple the state. The state had become too powerful. And they realized that the way to defeat Israel, and they proclaimed this openly, was through propaganda, to turn Western countries and populations against Israel, isolate it, cut it off from the world, and bring it to its knees that way. And part of that process is accusing it of everything under the sun. But critical thinkers like you and many in your audience need to look past the propaganda and the nonsense and look at the reality of what that country is and hopefully visit it. Anyone who has visited Israel knows it cannot be conceived of as an apartheid state. It's an appalling slur. And it's an insult primarily to the people of South Africa who actually lived under apartheid. When you go to Israel, you see people, Jews and Arabs, Christians, Muslims, Jews, living together, working together, serving in the highest ranks of civil society and academia and the military and the government. A new government is being formed in Israel as we speak, which will have an Arab party in the coalition alongside Jewish parties. The notion of it being an apartheid state is complete rubbish. And in terms of, war crimes allegations, Israel sadly is a country that is forced to go to war on a regular basis. It doesn't want to go to war. It wants to lead a peaceful existence and uplift its people and bring light to the world. That is the purpose of that country. But when you have terrorists on your doorstep that fire rockets after rocket after rocket at civilian targets, war is an inevitability. And in war, inevitably also, people will suffer and people will die. But to accuse the country of committing war crimes is just baseless as well.
Just finally, before I let you go tonight, what would you like world leaders, regardless of which side of the conflict they may be on, to do about anti-Semitism?
Leaders need to understand the power and the impact of their words. And if they want to take a position or express an opinion on how Israel and Hamas conduct themselves, they're entitled to do so. We're in a free country and a free society. But when you enter into this sort of overblown language about apartheid and ethnic cleansing, and basically demonizing the world's only Jewish country, there are consequences not to how Israel and Hamas conduct themselves. They don't really listen to that. They have their own interests. But there's an impact to our societies and our communities right here. So I hope that leaders listen to that, note that, and think about the welfare of our social harmony in our communities and tread carefully in this area.
All right, we'll leave it there. Alex Rivtune from the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. Thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Leah.
All right, now here's Ivan and Sarah with a look at what's coming up later tonight on WAMN News.
Thanks, Leo. Coming up on WAMN News, Dr. Andrew Miller talks about the end of his term at the top of the AMA and the way forward. A WAMN News exclusive.
Bring them home, please. A vigil held calling on the government to release the Biloela family.
On the rise, 30 to 49-year-olds age group roll up for Western Australia.
And on Western Perspective, the Prime Minister's brief visit to Perth to visit before G7. Join us after 5:30 West Coast time on the WAMN News Facebook page and YouTube channel.
Lots to look forward to. Thanks to both Ivan and Sarah there. A baby boy has achieved instant internet fame just hours after being born in the Philippines. His name? Hypertext Markup Language Rayo Pascual, aka HTML. Now, local media reports that his father may be a web developer, hence the name. It's certainly something of a name. Perhaps not as bad as the name Elon Musk gave his kid. If you've forgotten that name, that is XAEAXII. Poor kid. Now, tomorrow's forecast right across the country. Brisbane partly cloudy, a top of 22, 17 in Sydney. Starting the day at literally 0 degrees in the nation's capital, Canberra, getting up to 11 later in the day. 17 in Melbourne, but we can expect a fair bit of rain later in the week. 13 in Hobart, 18 in heavy clouds in Adelaide, 23 in Perth, 23 in Alice Springs, 16 in Perth, a chance of some light showers, and in Darwin, a warm top of 31. And finally tonight, we obviously know that the ABC will be running their planned Four Corners program about Scott Morrison's alleged relationship with QAnon tomorrow night. You can check out our report, though, right now. It's on our YouTube channel. Political reporter Christian Penny, who you saw covering the G7 a bit earlier tonight, will be talking about why did the ABC delay the report, and also analysing the evidence we've already got about the apparent relationship Scott Morrison has with Tim Stewart, one of the conspiracy theories' biggest reported adherents. Again, that is on our YouTube channel now. You can just search 6 News Australia to find it. And that is 6 News for this Sunday evening. You can stay up to date with the latest news by heading to our website, 6newsau.com, and following us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Lit. Just search 6 News AU to find us. I'm Leonardo Puglisi. Thanks for your company. Good night.